Ladies and gentlemen, start your engines. You're listening to the Mental for Moto podcast. Welcome. This episode of the Mental for Moto podcast is brought to you by Death Grip Gloves. Perfect for moto and mountain biking, Death Grip gloves are all about maximising performance, comfort and rider feel. Featuring super cool styling, a plush leather palm, four-way stretch gussets for maximum flexibility and silicone printed palms and fingertips for optimum grip and control, Death Grip gloves represents premium quality at an unbelievable price. Head over to www.deathgrip.store and order yourself a pair of these bad boys today. Alrighty, we're live. Before I get started, I'd just like to say thanks to everyone that's called or messaged in the last week or two inquiring about more podcast content. It felt awesome to know that people are eager for more. Unfortunately, I've been laid out with a pretty average case of COVID, and I even lost my voice for a while there, so it definitely hasn't been the ideal start to a budding podcasting career. I don't tend to get sick very often, and this was my first time catching the spicy flu. Let's just say it's been less than pleasant, and some of the lingering symptoms totally suck. As you can probably hear from my voice, I'm still not fully recovered, and I'm a bit croaky, but hopefully I can make it through to the end of the episode, and so can you. For obvious reasons, being sick has prevented me from recording with in-studio guests in the last few weeks, and I definitely don't want to be passing on any COVID germs right before Christmas. Rather than twiddle my thumbs though, I'm just going to try to make do until things are back on track. Fortunately, there's been a lot of interesting stuff happening in the moto scene lately, so there's still plenty to talk about. I'm going to start with some of this week's breaking news, then move on to the main topic of this episode, the WSX, or World Supercross Championship, and why I think, in the years to come, it's going to overtake the AMA Supercross in popularity. Firstly though, the big news that has everyone talking at the moment. Ken Roczen signing with the HEP Suzuki team to race the AMA Supercross in the US next year. This will hopefully reinvigorate all the Flintstones, RM Army fans, while having a yellow bike back up at the pointy end of the field will definitely be awesome to see. For all the idiots saying that Roczen has passed it and should retire, in 2021 the guy scored more points than any other rider in AMA Motocross and Supercross combined. And despite having a rough year in the AMA series this year, Roczen finished the year strong with some solid rides in the WSX and Red Bull Straight Rhythm. Of course, there's still a question hanging over his head about his ability to sustain peak performance for a full season, but from all accounts he's loving the Suzuki so far, and he's one of the most talented dudes to ever throw his leg over a dirt bike. So I'm definitely excited to see what he can bring to the table at round 1 in Anaheim on Jan 7. How's this news relevant to the Australian moto scene, you might ask? Well, rumour has it that the HEP Suzuki team has given Kenny the option to race either the AMA Motocross in the US in the latter half of 2023 or to defend his WSX title. There's no doubt that Roczen is in the twilight of his career, and having fun seems to be pretty high on his priority list. If you don't follow him on Instagram, get on it, because it's been very entertaining lately. We all know that the US summer motocross season is a hard slog, and he's appeared to struggle a bit, especially in the heat in the last few years. So I think there's a good chance that Aussie fans will end up seeing the German back racing WSX in 2023, which also means we might see him battling for glory on Aussie soil again at the WSX final next November. Speaking of WSX, in more breaking news, SX Global this week have announced the dates and Grand Prix locations for the World Supercross Championship in 2023. So, it looks like we're going to see 6 rounds next year in 6 different countries across 4 continents. It's hard to argue that this is not starting to look and feel more like a genuine World Championship. If it all goes to plan, this should shut up the critics of this year's 2-round pilot series, and it's a step closer to having a full 12 to 16 round series, which is what SX Global are apparently aiming for once everything starts firing on all cylinders over the next couple of years. According to the announcement, the WSX is going to kick off in the UK again on July 1st, this time in Birmingham, with a second round 3 weeks later on the 22nd of July in France. Unlike this year's series, which took place in the US off-season, These rounds of WSX will be concurrent with the American National Motocross Series, so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. After France, we have a massive 9-week wait for round 3 of the WSX, set to be held in Indonesia at a venue yet to be confirmed on September 30th. This has me scratching my head a little bit. I'm sure there must be a good reason for the extended break, such as venue availability or conflicting promotional schedules, but in any case, I personally think that such a long break after just 2 rounds is not ideal from a fan perspective. I just hope that for the first couple of rounds, we have enough excitement and controversy to keep everyone frothing until round 3. The good news is that for Aussie fans, the last 2 rounds of our domestic Australian Pro MX series are scheduled in August, so that'll give us something to sink our teeth into during the break. Anyhow, after round 3 in Indonesia, the WSX series moves to Düsseldorf, Germany, just 2 weeks later, on October the 14th. While I'm now an Aussie citizen, I was actually born in Düsseldorf and still have a bit of family over there, so it'd be a dream come true to be able to make it over to see a Supercross race there in person. Did I mention that I'm looking for sponsors for the podcast? Anyhow, after round 4 in Germany, we see another quick 2-week turnaround with the series heading to Vancouver, Canada for the penultimate round. This should be close enough to the United States to stir up some of those uber-patriotic US fans, and we might even see a few high-profile US riders defect to make it across the border as wildcard entries. They'll probably need to dodge a few machine gun towers and barbed wire fences that the US factories have set up along the border, but in any case, it should make for some good talking points. And finally, after a 4-week break, the 2023 WSX Grand Finale will again conclude here in Melbourne, Australia on November 24 and 25th. I imagine the format will be relatively similar to what we saw this year, with the first round of the Aussie Supercross Series and WSX qualifying held on the Friday and the WSX main event held on the Saturday night. Once again, having the format play out like this is a huge coup for Australian motocross and supercross riders and fans alike, as it gives Aussie riders an opportunity to perform in front of a global audience. After not having any Supercross on Aussie soil since 2019, thanks to COVID, the gift that just keeps on giving, this year it was encouraging to see the likes of Matt Moss, Aaron Tanti, and Wilson Todd already being somewhat competitive with some of the best Supercross riders in the world. Next year, Wilson Todd will be coming off his first AMA Supercross season, so he definitely will be one to watch once the WSX rolls around. With a bit of luck, Luke Clout will also be healthy and fighting fit. And I'm especially excited to see what Cole Webster can do in 2023. Cole's got to be one of the fastest and smoothest guys I've ever seen on a motocross track. He's definitely a unique talent. It'll be interesting to see if his considerable outdoor riding skills will transcend to the indoor arenas and into the WSX over the next few years. I think there's a good chance that all of these guys are going to be right in the mix in 2023 if they have the opportunity to race the World Supercross Championship again. All right. All that WSX talk is the perfect segue for my very first opinion piece. Drum roll. Why I think in the years to come, the World Supercross Series is going to eclipse the AMA Supercross to become the premier Supercross event on the planet. You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen, and I think I'm definitely going against the grain with this one. As I mentioned in my intro pod a few weeks ago, I consume a lot of moto-related content. Most moto content naturally comes out of the US. And for the most part, I love listening to all the different media personalities and the views they share. However, when the topic of the World Supercross started to heat up earlier this year, I found myself disagreeing with a lot of the views being put forward. Firstly, I'm a pretty positive guy, so I'm always trying to look for the good in every situation. So I must admit, I was actually a little surprised when I heard a few of the bigger MX media personalities damning the WSX to failure before it had even started. It was funny because a lot of them weren't actually trying to be that negative. In any case, whether the criticism was delivered in the form of unapologetic shit-canning or under the guise of diplomacy, it's pretty safe to say there have not been many media pundits who have forecast major long-term success for the WSX series. I thought that outlook might have softened a little following this year's Pilot Grand Prix, which went about as well or better than most expected, but it really hasn't. At best, many of the industry are predicting WSX to be a B series, in the shadow of and picking up the scraps of the AMA Supercross. At worst, they're predicting that the WSX will survive for a couple of years before quickly fading into oblivion. Some examples of the statements that I've heard to support these predictions include: the WSX series will never attract the top-tier riders like Eli Tomac, Chase Sexton, or the Lawrence brothers. The WSX will never be as popular as AMA Supercross. Without the very best riders, nobody is going to watch the WSX. The US factories will do everything they can to prevent the WSX from being successful. The WSX will not attract enough investors to compete with AMA Supercross or pay the very best riders in the world enough. As I said, most of these negative sentiments originated in the US, so I probably shouldn't be quite as surprised as I am. I mean, Americans have a bit of a reputation for not being able to see beyond their own borders. One only needs to look at the NFL, NHL, NBA, NASCAR, IndyCar, and Major League Baseball to realise that the majority of the US sporting empire, while successful in its own right, is very inwardly focused. What happens elsewhere in the sporting world is often not on the radar. So on the basis of what I was hearing, I wasn't really motivated to address the criticism. That was, until I heard some of the same negative views being parroted by riders trackside here in Australia. That is why I decided to pull the trigger on this podcast. So, I'm going to refute the naysayers. Of course, I don't have a crystal ball and I don't really know what the future holds for WSX, nor whether it will ultimately become the most prestigious Supercross series in the world. But I'm going to put forward some reasons why, just why it might. So here we go. Number 1. The WSX model is based on Formula 1 and MotoGP, the two most popular motorsports in the world. If you're creating a new global sports and entertainment event and are looking for a successful model, MotoGP and Formula 1 are a good place to start. The epitome of prestige in motorsports, F1 and MotoGP each attract about 450 million viewers per year. That's about 430 million viewers more than the AMA Supercross series. This is not to cast stones at the AMA Supercross series, but it highlights the potential difference in scale between a truly World Series versus a successful domestic series. Number 2, the US-based industry powers that be can't stop riders from racing WSX forever. As most of the listeners are probably aware, each of the major Japanese bike manufacturers has a separate arm that looks after operations independently in the US. These are American Honda, Kawasaki Motors USA, and Yamaha Motor USA, etc. And the negative response to the WSX from the US manufacturers is disappointing, but not entirely surprising. Their operations are built around the end goal of generating bike sales within the US, so it's in their interest to oppose anything that is perceived to threaten domestic bike sales. And why might a global Supercross series like the WSX be perceived as a threat? Well, there's every chance it may lure some of the US-based superstars offshore, draw fans' eyes away from the US series, or jeopardise the standing of the AMA Supercross as the premier Supercross series in the world. It would appear that their main response to the threat this year was to flex their considerable muscles to ensure factory-sponsored riders currently contracted to race Supercross and Motocross in the US did not participate in the pilot events of the WSX, even though they were in the US off-season. In 2023, the WSX schedule partly coincides with the AMA Pro Motocross schedule, which really gives the US factories even more leverage. Any riders who are contracted to race the AMA National Motocross Series will obviously not be able to race the WSX in 2023, period. American Honda and Kawasaki have their superstars firmly locked up. Chase Sexton, the Lawrence brothers, Jason Anderson and Adam Cianciarulo, so we know we won't be seeing those guys racing WSX in 2023 at least. So, who might we see racing the WSX in 2023? Well, if we look at riders with the Supercross-only contracts for the AMA season next year, that might give us some idea. Some of the names might surprise you. Marvin Musquin, Cooper Webb, Eli Tomac, Colt Nichols, Dean Wilson, Max Anstey, Freddie Norrin, Vince Freeze, Mitchell Oldenburg, Cole Peters, Jace Owen, Cade Clayson, Chris Blose. Plus there's a bunch of other main event guys on satellite teams as well. Add to this list the likes of Ken Roczen, Kyle Chisholm, Shane McElrath, Justin Brayton, Justin Bogle, Josh and Justin Hill, accomplished Aussies like Matt Moss, Aaron Tanti, Luke Clout, Wilson Todd, and let's not forget the fastest old man on two wheels, Chad Reed, plus a bunch of very competent Frenchies, Canadians, and a couple of Brits too. On balance, it might not quite yet be at the level of the AMA Supercross Series in terms of overall talent, but that is a pretty solid pool of riders that could potentially line up on the gate to race WSX next year. Another way that the promoters of the respective US series are trying to keep riders on US soil is with the new AMA Super Motocross World Championship, or SMX, a hybrid playoff style 3-event series that has been bolted onto the end of the 17-race AMA Supercross Championship and 11-race AMA National Motocross Championship, also set to start in 2023. To qualify, riders must compete in both the AMA Supercross and AMA Motocross races. While measures such as this might contribute to slowing the growth of the WSX a tiny bit, I think that's about the biggest impact they will have in the long run. With regards to the Super Motocross World Championship, I'm excited about it as it means I get to watch more races. But for the teams and riders, adding more races and a hybrid series to what is already a pretty long and demanding Supercross and Motocross schedule simply isn't the answer, in my opinion anyway. And if we're talking about a World Championship status, which is how it's being promoted, I'm sorry, but a series that never leaves the USA is never going to be seen as a legitimate World Championship, especially when competing against a truly global series, which is what the WSX represents. As I'll explain in later points, in the fullness of time, I think the best Supercross riders will ultimately follow the money and the prestige. At present, the balance of power undoubtedly still remains with the AMA Supercross Series. But for how long? Number 3. WSX opens up a potential market that dirt bike manufacturers and investors just can't ignore. The US reportedly brings in just over a 30% market share of the world dirt bike sales. That's pretty significant. But adversely, it also means that nearly 70% of dirt bike sales are outside of the USA. With a population of 330 million people, the US has about 7.5 billion less people than the rest of the planet. And if you're looking for a platform to market your product to the biggest possible audience, would the pool with 330 million potential customers, or the pool with 7.83 billion potential customers, be the better investment option? Yeah, I know that's oversimplified, and not everyone in the world is going to watch Supercross, nor is everyone going to go out and buy a dirt bike after seeing the WSX. It's also a fact that Americans do love their motorsport. But guess what? So do the British, the French, the Spaniards, the Italians, the Australians, the Canadians, the Germans, which I'm sure account for a lot of those 70% of dirt bike sales outside of the US. However, for manufacturers, WSX could open the door to largely untapped markets in the Middle East, Asia Pacific, China, Russia. You get the point. If it all goes as planned, WSX will attract new eyes to the sport, provide opportunities for exposure domestically and internationally, and improve the popularity of dirt biking and increase dirt bike sales all around the world. Point 4. WSX will grow with just a few big names. I say this with a caveat. In order to be successful in its first few years of operation, the WSX doesn't need the very best riders currently competing in the AMA series. Firstly, having the best riders doesn't necessarily equate to the best racing. One of the most highly anticipated races on any given night of Supercross is the LCQ. Why? Because the racing is almost guaranteed to be close, and riders will push themselves to, and sometimes beyond, their limits. These are the ingredients that make for a great spectator experience. Provided the WSX can secure some relatively high-profile riders, the tracks are conducive to good racing, and the race formats and point distribution methods promote close competition, the WSX will attract viewers. And at this stage, this is all the series needs to grow. Attracting TV viewers and getting bums on seats at the live events will bring in the money. And when there's money on the table that the promoters are willing to reinvest into the series, higher profile riders will come. And with higher profile riders, the legitimacy and credibility of the series will be cemented. Do you really think that if there is a big bag of gold shekels and a world championship status on offer, the current top 10 riders in the AMA Supercross aren't going to be tempted? That they'll just turn their backs and let Vince Freeze take all the glory? I think not. Number 5, WSX will build talent from within. There's a second side to this same coin that amazingly seems to be getting overlooked. With increased opportunities to ride and race Supercross, WSX will begin to forge its own superstars. Thanks to WSX, in the coming years, I expect we'll see new Supercross training facilities begin to pop up in Europe, Australia, Asia, maybe even places like the Middle East. This will result in more access to better training programs and facilities outside of the US, resulting in the performance level of riders everywhere going up. Not to mention, it'll create opportunities for the next generation of riders outside of the US who might otherwise have not had the access to Supercross facilities whatsoever. After all, it's certainly not a matter of raw talent. We've already seen that Aussie riders, French riders and Canadian riders and UK riders can be competitive with the Americans. Give riders in other countries the same opportunities to train and practice like the professional Supercross racers in the US, and they will be competitive. Number 6, WSX events are a novel experience for live audiences. Just like MotoGP and Formula 1, WSX offers people a unique and novel once-per-year live Supercross experience that is of a scale that is unmatched by any other domestic dirt bike events. The enormity of the show, quality and excitement that WSX events are able to generate will ensure sold-out stadiums wherever the series goes. Cardiff and Melbourne were perfect examples of this, attracting a combined 80,000 live spectators between them. Each year, this also means that a new wave of kids in a variety of different countries will experience seeing a live Supercross race for the first time. The natural flow-on from this will undoubtedly be hundreds of shiny new dirt bikes for young and old alike appearing under Christmas trees wherever these races take place. The potential impact of these events on domestic motorcycle sales in countries outside of the US is therefore likely to be significant. I can attest to this because an event very similar to the WSX is exactly how I was introduced to motocross and supercross. Back in 1990, yes, I'm that old, my dad took me to see the Supercross Masters in Melbourne. A couple of months later, there were 2 brand new dirt bikes under our Christmas tree, a Suzuki TS200R for him and a shiny new KX60 for me. The rest, as they say, is history. Number 7. WSX can generate better storylines than any domestic series. The local hero versus the villain with the funny accent. It may be cliche, but it's pretty much the premise of every action movie since the dawn of time. This is the storyline that WSX generates wherever it goes, and it's a storyline with global appeal. Okay, the term villain might be a bit rich, unless your name is Vince Freeze. But the point is that fans will fill arenas year after year to see their local heroes battle it out against the best that the rest of the world has to offer. And it's these sorts of storylines on a world scale that creates legends. If I ask my non-moto friends who Ricky Carmichael is, or Jeremy McGrath, or Eli Tomac, or James Stewart, they'd look at me blankly. But mention names like Michael Schumacher, Lewis Hamilton, Valentino Rossi, Marc Marquez, Mick Doohan, and most will nod in instant recognition. Depending on where you come from, any one of these icons of motorsport may have played the role of hero or villain. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. WSX has the potential to raise the profile of supercross riders to these same lofty heights. Number 8. WSX is more prestigious in the eyes of a global audience. Unless you're an American living in America, this one's a no-brainer. Fast forward to 2024, when WSX has expanded to host maybe 10 or 12 rounds in different countries. Even the harshest critics won't be able to dispute its status as a bona fide world championship. Sure, maybe there's 1 or 2 supercross riders still racing the AMA Supercross Series that are arguably better than the best rider in WSX, but it's likely not going to matter. Irrespective of how fast the top riders still racing in the US may be, They'll be contesting a domestic championship, and nobody outside of the US will consider the AMA Supercross champion to be a world champion. Like the Hurlings versus Tomac debate, if it plays out like this, it should make for some great bench racing in any case. But what about the AMA Super Motocross World Championship? The SMX? Well, personally, I think it's a flawed concept and that it will eventually fizzle. Not that it won't be entertaining in the meantime, but keeping the best riders in the world fit and healthy for 31 rounds is a big ask. And I just don't think trying to mash up motocross and supercross into a 3-round playoff style event is going to result in a legitimate champion. Why? Well, let's imagine it was this year. Eli Tomac wins the AMA Supercross and Motocross Championships respectively. But then, during the Super Motocross playoff finale, something happens. He tips over, he has a mechanical, or another rider, maybe Jason Anderson, Cooper Webb, Ken Roczen, ends up winning the playoff final. In the eyes of the industry or fans, would the Super Motocross Championship title trump the season-long achievements of Eli Tomac? I highly doubt it. Number 9. The idea of travelling the world is more attractive to riders and their families. Getting paid to race and travel the world and experience different cultures and landscapes definitely has some appeal. Sure, the jet-setting lifestyle might not be everyone's cup of tea, but there's something very glamorous about the idea, especially as it's something very few humans have an opportunity to experience. The appeal is even more apparent when we consider that WSX will run concurrently with the AMA Motocross Series. This gives high-level professional riders the option of racing the World Supercross Championship, travelling to locations like France, Germany, Australia, England, to race every 2 or 3 weeks, earning bucket loads of cash, or pushing themselves through 12 rounds of outdoor motocross, enduring a grueling hot summer in the US with very few breaks, for what is likely to be considerably less money. Once again, I would definitely wager that despite the US factory's best efforts to bind top-tier riders to the US scene, it's only a matter of time until the best supercross and motocross riders in the world join the WSX wave. Once a few factory riders jump ship, it'll become an open market, and it'll be the riders who will be able to dictate the terms to the factories, not the other way around. Number 10. SX Global are dedicated to creating the ultimate supercross experience for fans and riders alike. For years and years, we've listened to the same gripes coming out of the AMA Supercross and motocross scenes. There are too many races. The promoters don't listen to the riders or their teams. Riders outside of the top 5 don't get paid enough. Nobody, including the promoters, will argue that the pilot WSX events in Cardiff and Melbourne were perfect by any stretch of the imagination. The event formats, TV packages, tracks, and many of the finer details of the events left a lot of room for improvement. But what was quickly apparent, even between Cardiff and Melbourne, were the huge lengths that the promoters went to prioritise and fix issues that they could in order to improve the experience for riders, teams, and fans. From all accounts, the organisers at SX Global sought and listened to feedback, then implemented considerable changes throughout the series. As a result, there is absolutely no doubt that the Melbourne event was a big improvement on many fronts when compared to Cardiff. Unlike the US-based promoters who have a reputation for being stuck in their ways, this sort of attitude and demand for continual improvement is what I think will help SX Global take WSX to new unprecedented heights. And there it is, 10 reasons why I think the World Supercross Series is going to eclipse the AMA Supercross to become the premier Supercross event on the planet. So, do I really think this is exactly how it's going to play out? I'm not sure, but I think the potential is definitely there. And it's abundantly clear that the guys behind WSX aren't willing to rest on their laurels. And before anyone accuses me of blowing smoke, I don't know anyone involved with WSX, and I'm certainly not getting paid to promote the WSX. This was really just a bit of a thought experiment. I kept hearing why the WSX was not going to be successful, and I felt like playing a bit of devil's advocate. If I was a betting man, though, I think it's really just a matter of time. In my opinion, I see most of the challenges that the WSX series currently faces resolving themselves organically, and within another 3 or 4 years, I expect that the WSX could overtake the AMA as the most prestigious Supercross series in the world. To be honest though, I don't see the success of WSX having a negative impact on the US AMA Supercross and Motocross series in the long run. I'll still be a fan. It'll just open up more opportunities for riders and fans to experience Supercross. The global series will also bring new eyes and new money to the sport, which will hopefully benefit both the WSX and the AMA championships. Anyway, that just about wraps up this podcast. Please let me know on one of our social media platforms what you think. Am I tripping? Or do you agree with some of my conclusions? I'm genuinely interested to hear your opinions. Once again, thanks to Death Grip Gloves for coming on board as our very first sponsor. I've been wearing my Death Grips for about 8 months and absolutely love them. Do yourself a favour. Visit www.deathgrip.store and order yourself a pair today. And be sure to let them know that Mental for Moto sent you. Also, don't forget to check out our website, mentalformoto.com, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Our YouTube channel will be going live soon too. I've got a bunch of podcast episodes planned, including a look back at the 2022 Australian Motocross and Supercross seasons, which will hopefully involve chatting with a few riders. If you like what we're doing and want to share any thoughts or feedback related to this episode, are interested in coming on as a guest or supporting the show as a sponsor, please reach out via email, contact@mentalformoto.com. Remember, that's mental, the number 4, moto. Or DM me via one of our social profiles. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to bringing you another episode of the Mental for Moto podcast soon.